What's Cooking series webinar on digital public infrastructure for sustainable agriculture supply chains. Today, we are going to look at the insights from one of the most interesting platforms, the Digital Integration of Agriculture Supply Chain Alliance, DIASCA. All the collaboration, because we will discuss, because we have been looking at digital traceability. Last week, I participated in a panel by TraceX on how suppliers of commodities have to comply with EUDR regulations. There's a lot of interest in that webinar across from many countries where suppliers are trying to supply commodities and goods to Europe. And there are a lot of new regulations coming in. And I think this is very important that since we are working with many countries in Eastern Europe and Asia and all over on helping them develop the digital public infrastructure for supply chains, I think this is a very timely webinar. This is a part of What's Cooking series. In this series, we invite private sector innovators, public sector leaders, thought leaders, collaborate platform developers, collaborators, startups, and number of World Bank teams who are using innovative digital technologies to transform agriculture food systems. So we have done about 95 of these webinars, and there's a global network of 12,000 people who have joined this knowledge network. Today's webinar is the 96th in this series, and previous sessions are available on World Bank's Open Learning Campus channel, as well as a YouTube channel which has been created for this. And you will find the link in the chat, and you can also access the earlier webinars there. But this webinar also will be available through the Open Learning Campus and the YouTube channel. Please keep your microphones muted to prevent any background noise. There will be a Q&A session after the presentation, and you can type the questions while you are listening to speakers. And please note which speaker you want to address that Q&A. And I would request speakers to just keep tab on the chat traffic, because we will have in the end dedicated and we'll pick some selected questions. But please keep on interacting with the participants virtually while this is going on, so that there's an active dialogue going on even while the webinar is going on. We will, eventually we will also send you the documentation, the videos of the webinar, a script, and also the script of the virtual conversation as a part of the record to all the participants who have registered for this webinar. So I won't talk much about the topic. The topic is very important at this stage for all the people, particularly who want to supply these commodities in a sustainable way. Sustainability is a very big concern in all the supply chain work. We are talking about how do we source them. We are talking about social issues in sustainability. We are looking at deforestation as a very major thing. So if you look at West Africa, cocoa and deforestation, we clearly need to get better at tracking what's happening. Then the climate change agenda, we need to see where water is being used less, where fertilizers have been used optimally, where pesticides have been used to a lesser extent. So we need to do very good tracking of from the climate perspective, the social perspective, and finally, as consumers are becoming more conscious from a consumer perspective as well. So without further ado, I'll now introduce the first speaker, Andrea Burkhardt. She's the team leader for this digitization initiative for sustainable agriculture supply chain within GIZ. She also is responsible for Digital Integration Alliance, but she also works on developing open source traceability systems in a trace, a digital public good, which also is a very interesting initiative for bringing supply chain transparency with smallholders. So I will introduce everyone as they come, and everyone knows how much time is available to them. Please stick to the time. We'll give you a 1-minute warning before your time closes, but I would expect everyone is prepared for being to the time there. So Andrea, over to you. and warm welcome.
Thank you very much, Parmesh, to have us here. I suppose you can see the presentation already, and I'm really delighted to present on DIASCA today. As you mentioned before, it really is a very important initiative, and we are happy to have so many partners also here in the room that we will share and present our work together with today. What we notice, my team and I, as we are working on digitalization in the Initiative for Sustainable Agricultural Supply Chains for a long time already, and we notice that they're really looking at regulations. There are a lot of challenges upcoming. In the initiative in INA, we are all great fans of regulations. And seeing the EU regulation at the horizon some years ago, it was absolutely clear that this would come with a huge amount of digital requirements for all actors along the supply chain. At the same time, we hear all the time from the producers we work with that they have the challenge of a variety of tracing tools, which all need to be kind of fed with the same data, but in different formats. And how messy this is and annoying, and how much more work that makes. So we decided to concentrate on that issue of interoperability to make it easier for everyone along the supply chain to use digital tools in agriculture. Now, as we see that according to EU DR traceability becomes mandatory, because definitely there's no way to prove that on your field has not been forested before the official cutoff day without using digital technologies, we are even happier that we started DIASCA early enough to be now already able to present first outcomes. You will hear about that concretely later on. So what we were looking at as the most important challenges due to these regulations, due diligence, traceability, are the two factors of limited digital access, especially for farmers. Market fragmentation, meaning that there are so many traceability and software solutions on the market. Often they are silo solutions, which due to lack of a common language or translation mechanism, do not talk with each other. They do not exchange data. Furthermore, the lack of standardized methods leads to really inconsistent data in one cases, and also problems in collecting and sharing the data. What we also notice, and what most of people here listening know, is that there's a data sovereignty problem, that farmers especially do not have control over their valuable agricultural data, and they are not capable of earning what they are putting into with their valuable data. So what comes from that is that there's rather an additional burden through digitalization, that the economic and digital dependencies in the supply chain, in the global market, get bigger and bigger, and that the risk of market exclusion, especially if you look at EUDR and the necessity to prove that there has not been any deforestation, is really getting higher and dangerous for smallholders, especially. So to visualize that data challenges once more, it is important for me to stress that we are really noticing that all players in the supply chain suffer from a lack of information. They see that digitalization in the way it's used today, the tools are used today, the tools are working today, really erase the work they have to do, that they do not absolutely make everything easier but more complicated, that it's difficult to design which technology to use, and it's so complicated to combine different technologies. Therefore, looking at all these topics, problems, things people are facing along the supply chain, we decided that we want to scale digital public infrastructure in agriculture, and that we want that all stakeholders benefit from that. But of course, as GIZ, we have a special focus on farmers, on the people producing bananas, cocoa, you name it. What we did is we started a process to enhance the global digital ecosystem in agriculture. We started to develop and promote efficient, accessible, and interoperable digital public infrastructure elements and frameworks. And we did that through an open and inclusive multi-stakeholder process, which is DIASCA. We are very, very happy that this DIASCA started so well. And just to put it very briefly, a digital public infrastructure, as we are thinking and working on direction to reach it, means that there's a set of digital building blocks that can be open source tools like the already mentioned InnoTrace tool, and there are many, many others that facilitate the transparent, sustainable, and efficient management of agricultural supply chains. What we think is very important is that these infrastructures are publicly accessible and they all aim to support and benefit the stakeholders along the supply chain. And it's really entitled, and our aim is really to enhance the productivity, but also ensure sustainability along the supply chains and to make traceability easier for everyone and safer for everyone. When we started, our first phase is going to end in October. We set up 3 main areas of work. The first was to work on joint standards and norming in our working groups on traceability, forest monitoring, and farm income. And I'm very happy that I can say the guidelines to that will shortly be available. It was then very important from the beginning to also develop tech building blocks and collaborate to see how their implementation works in reality. And that is why we work together with Linux Foundation's XStack to build up the asset registry with FAO's WISP tool. We will hear about that later. We also used InnoTrace in that, and we worked on prototypes of a real infrastructure for EUDR compliance, which already combine the different blocks we have built. Talking about that, I am at reached our reference projects, which are really very important because we said there's so much time pressure in this whole process, especially on EUDR, that we need to prove what we are working on in reality at the same time when we are doing the working groups and the round tables. So our actual reference projects are now in Kenya and Rwanda and in Honduras. John will present about that later on, and in Indonesia, where Remy will talk about later. What I find so impressive and what makes me really very, very happy is the amount of participants. We have a large group of people following loosely, several hundreds, and even a large group of people joining the roundtables and the working groups. And of course, there are some people really working as professional and experts on the papers, and others are rather following it. In Berlin, we just had a strategic workshop to prepare how we can go on with our work after the first phase. I have to admit that due to budget problems, that is really a big concern. We want to go the way to a multi-donor platform, and we hope to get a lot of support. But as you can see here, there are many partners that are already committed to work on a digital public infrastructure with us. So with this invitation to really join forces to build digital railway tracks for the agricultural sector, I hope that we all together empower actors and especially farmers, and just get in contact to us. You will hear interesting details in the following round. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much for kicking us off. Very good start, and you really gave us the outline of what this whole initiative is about. And I have great pleasure in inviting now the next speaker, John Keogh. I think you have already seen his CV. He's quite a leading thinker on this issue. He has got many hats, and I'll be very brief. I think he advises both public and private sectors globally. He's also a keynote speaker. Currently, he's the managing principal at Shantella Insight Partners, a Los Angeles-based niche advisory research firm, and he's also professor of practice at McGill University Center for Convergence of Health and Nutrition. So, without further ado, over to you, John.
Thank you so much, and hello to everyone. Good morning from Los Angeles. Nice and early here. You know, it brings me back when my colleague was just talking about digital traceability. I have to share an anecdote. So in the late 80s, early 90s, I was based in the Netherlands, building high-performance supply chains with Digital Equipment Corporation. And then we had to go and meet with this small startup company in California, and that small company actually owns this WebEx platform, and that company is, of course, Cisco. So going back to the late 80s, early 90s, when I was with Digital Equipment Corporation, we actually introduced the first Cisco equipment into Europe and started building the first digital networks. My particular focus was on building supply chains, and I'll never forget those first networks that we actually put into France, Italy, and right across Europe. So without further ado, I want to introduce what we're doing in the traceability work group. My colleague Brian King is the head of digital at CGIAR. Brian is not with us today. He's on a short vacation. So I'll go through a number of slides that gives you an overview of how we've approached the initiative. So when we got together first with the traceability work group, we wanted to find out what types of organizations were actually interested in the traceability work group. So you can see here on the left-hand side, on the top, some not-for-profits, public supply chain organizations, and some researchers. And then we asked, well, what is your role within those organizations? And then you can see here on the right-hand side, what are your organization's top 3 concerns? And you can see here, overwhelmingly, readiness was the key issue. Capacity building was critical. The costs and some unintended consequences. People just were looking at, well, what if we're not compliant with EUDR? What might happen then? There was also some concerns around economic or social exclusion. as a result of EUDR. So this was our brain trust with all of these brilliant people from different organizations, different functions that we had online, and we wanted to get as much as possible from them. We had regular webinars, and we also had some workshops online as well. One thing that was important for us was to look at work that was already done, and the traceability work group is informed by and was leveraging a trust framework. And this is from the Trusted Bytes program, BYTES, in the UK, that looked to digitize the food chain. And we had the lead author from this paper, Steve Brewer, join several of our webinars to explain how this framework worked. Again, it was not technology decisions, but putting this infrastructure in place and this model that helps you look at the key core areas. You can see in the wheel on the right-hand side here, interoperability was critical, governance, and operations. So we use this paper, and I would encourage any of you to have a look at this paper. It's one of the, it's a short paper, but it's quite valuable to help set the scene for moving to digital traceability frameworks. Then, of course, we had to do a deep dive because it's very, very important to get out there, literally into the field and talk to the people who are doing the work today. And we asked these questions in Honduras. We asked, what are your main concerns related to the compliance? What products and services may help you address your concerns? What products or services could be common or shared? So again, thinking of digital public infrastructure. And then the other question was, should they be led entirely by the government, the private sector, or be a public-private collaboration? So exiting this workshop, we had a declaration or a statement of intent to work together, to collaborate with DIASCA to get to a point where we could do a pilot very, very soon to prove that Honduran coffee can be compliant with the EUDR regulations. So entering this project with Honduras, we had a generic value chain analysis, and we did some quantitative and qualitative analysis, which included, field work. It included survey. It also included trying to find out what work was already done in context of Honduran coffee. So we had a generic framework, but we wanted to introduce two key things. And that's the notion of critical tracking events and key data elements. So just by way of a short definition by IFT here from 2009, critical tracking events are, think about these, the connections here with the red arrows in between these areas. So critical tracking events are those events that must be recorded in order to allow for effective traceability of products in a supply chain. So there are the instances where product is moved between premises or even between the different parties, the trading parties, if the product could be transformed or is otherwise determined to be a point of data capture, where data capture is necessary to trace a product. And for each of these critical tracking events, there are the 5 Ws, or what's called the key data elements or data attributes, they may also be called. And that covers the who, the what, where, when, and why. And I'll show you an example of that from GS1 US. And then, so as part of that work in uncovering, well, what has been done already in the context of coffee in Honduras, and we found this paper. This is from Wageningen University in the Netherlands, which broke down and decomposed the value chain and also how products flow in the value chain. So you can see here on the top left, the smallholders, more than 77,000, and then the medium, 17,800, and the large, just over 2,000. Now that adds up to, I think, about 97,000, which, as you can imagine, is very common in most countries, that 95+% of organizations, especially in food, are small, medium enterprises. And they're really the critical actors in the value chain that we need to get to understand their concerns and how we can help them move forward. So in the workshops that have been occurring over the last months in Honduras, and there was an online workshop just this past Monday, we're trying to figure out and validate, is this still how things work? Is this how product flows? But also importantly, where does traceability start? Does traceability start at the production level, or does it start at the consolidation? What I mean by that is, when the producers, the smallholders when they produce coffee, they put it into sacks. Is there an identification on that sack that identifies them as the party, the producer, the location, and also the commodity itself? So this is where we're doing the deep dive to expose what's happening in real time in the different countries. And of course, we'll collect those as digital artifacts or evidence that will inform our decision-making moving forward. Here is the example that we can learn from, and this example here is from GS1 US. You can see down here that this is a recent document from May 2024. Now, GS1 is a not-for-profit supply chain standards organization that works on behalf of industry. Typically, GS1's role is to help industry implement regulations by way of coming up with documents like this, which are guidelines to help industry move forward. And I'll just highlight here, the harvesting here is the critical tracking event where the tomatoes are picked and placed in totes. And then at that particular critical tracking event, you have on the left-hand side, so when did it happen? What happened, where did it happen, and why did it happen? Now, the who is not included in here, but the who is implied and will be on other documents. The who is the trading party. And you can see what GS1 has done here very cleverly. They have mapped this to the US FDA FSMA ruling for traceability. So we want to do similar, where we will come up with an EUDR type of column that will match it. And on the right-hand side here, you can see that EPCIS field translation. EPCIS is actually a standard. It's not a technology, but it's a standard from GS1 that is also an ISO standard for data interoperability. And on the right-hand side, you can see the attribute value and how that would look like. So this is just by way of example. I would encourage you to look at this document if you're unfamiliar with critical tracking events and key data elements. The FDA are calling for these in their new FSMA traceability ruling. So again, what I have highlighted here in the red box is how we will mature the conversation in Honduras to come up with the critical tracking events and the key data elements for coffee. This is my second last slide, just to point out that there is a lot of work ongoing right now. This is another new publication from April 2024 by the International Chamber of Commerce, and they represent more than 45 million companies in 170 different countries. You can see on the first column here, the key trade documents that are what's considered standardized. And in the middle, where standards exist, but without interoperability, and on the right-hand side, where there's early stage standardization. Things like preferential certificates of origin. Of course, this will be driven by trade agreements between the trading parties. So this is just an example of the stuff that's going on. There's a lot of work going on. My colleagues will talk about some of the work going on at ISO as well. So finally, KDEs and CTEs, the capture for Honduran coffee is what's happening right now. Solution architecture design, iterative prototyping, open source, open standard, open learning. And I want to include in this one other term, open science. We're looking at how can open science help us as well, then mapping the standards and gaps to the prototype. So 1st of January 2025 is when we're looking to finish. And now I want to pass on to my next colleague, Remy D'Annunzio.
Thanks a lot, John, and very rich insights and with very clear examples and illustrations of how this work is going on. It really makes it live, and you brought in many new ideas to the discussion. So I think I hope people keep track of this, what's happening when you come out in January, and we'll keep watching what comes out of this whole process there. And So without further ado, I want to introduce the next speaker. Dr. Remu Anunzio is a forestry officer and acting technical lead for Forest Data Partnership in the Forest Monitoring and Data Platforms team of FAO. I think I'll let Remy now introduce the work he's doing and in the context of DIASCA. Go ahead, Remy.
Can you hear me fine?
Yes, we can hear you.
Okay, excellent. And can you see my screen?
Do that as well.
Okay, excellent. Thank you very much, Sunil, for passing the floor to me, and thank you, Parnesh, for the intro. So I'm Remy. I'm working in the FAO in the forestry division. I'm based in headquarters in Rome, and I would like to quickly touch upon the work we're doing in FAO with partners, including the Forest Data Partnership, Aim for Forest program, but also the Sustainable Agriculture for Forest Ecosystems project under the Team Europe Initiative Zero Deforestation Hub on providing free, open source, transparent tools for deforestation risk assessment. So we all know that we've had years of voluntary approaches to curb deforestation linked to commodity production. And now, as mandatory regulations are on the rise, we are trying to see how the tools that we developed under the voluntary approaches, especially for carbon markets, in particular for the REDD+ scheme, how those tools can be adapted and adopted to provide information to support zero deforestation claims under those regulatory schemes. So the question we want to address, and the question we want to address within this work on building with partners a digital public infrastructure, is how to address deforestation risk to support compliance requirements. And we wanted to do this through a pre-competitive environment that enables to produce robust, transparent, and replicable data by anyone. So to address the question, how to assess deforestation risk, we more or less agree that the necessary building blocks needs to be able to draw or generate boundaries at the farm level. Also needs to be able to harmonize the information around the geometries themselves and ideally register them into an interoperable system, if possible, based on geospatial index. And in parallel, once those items are executed, we need to be able to grab geodata, layers of information on tree cover, on forests, on commodities, on disturbances around tree cover, around commodities land use change, and process them through models that enable to assess risk of deforestation. So that's more or less the task we had in mind. And we have developed under the SAFE umbrella a first prototype of that particular component of the digital public infrastructure. And we did this using existing solutions of open source or as open source as possible technology. I would like, before I go into a quick dive into what we do there, to insist on the fact that the solution we've built is by essence very modular, in the sense that each of the modules can actually and should be interoperable and replaceable by other solutions. We're not providing a solution that is a one-stop shop, but instead we are really advocating for a framework of interoperability where the different modules can be substituted by another. For instance, at the first step of the DPI that we constructed, we initially set up a connection with the Open Forest Ground application. That's a next generation, very intuitive application to register points of polygons from a mobile application. But we very quickly came into contact with TechnoServe, which is also implementing the rest of the WISP application within their own app. And we're really happy about that collaboration. Or same thing with the InnoTrace full traceability solution. Same thing, we are collaborating very closely with AgStack and the Linux Foundation to use the GeoIDs that are produced by the asset registry. But we are also finalizing the plugin with the global field IDs from VARDA, and we show that we can actually use those things and plug them through the public APIs that they have. So we are building this infrastructure. It's as open, public, and free as possible, and it basically takes back the little bits of technology I mentioned earlier. We call the prototype WISP. It stands for what's in that plot, because that's what we look at, and we look at that level, which is the really relevant landscape to look at assessing risk of deforestation for the plot. Why? We know that there are numerous publicly available Earth observation layers and maps that are out there. They all provide data on forests, on tree cover, on land use, on change. And very often, and that's a topic that Andrea mentioned earlier in her opening remarks, is that those maps may differ. They may have they may use different definitions, different classification systems, and this wealth of data, this abundance of data, can sometimes be confusing. And even when you put them together, if you look at them at the pixel level, there's quite a bit of divergence. What's really interesting is that if you look at it at the plot level, so at the larger scale, we actually see much more convergence. And if you apply definitions like the ones applied in the UDR, we actually see a very nice convergence of evidence occurring at the plot level. And we are, by combining those different land cover layers, we are able to tell the land use story around a particular plot of land. So we really advocate for that convergence of evidence approach, insisting on the fact that maps are always somehow wrong and they can't prove anything in absolute, but they actually do converge at the plot level and they can support the compliance claims for zero deforestation. We also advocate for integration of as many national or regional data as possible. Global maps are great, but they can be made better and they can be complemented with national efforts. And one last point we insist on, and we try to really work towards, is that open and transparent processes are needed, and that the only way to do that is through really open and public data set and models. So the code of the WISP process is open, it's published on GitHub, it can be reused, reproduced, modified, adapted, complemented, you name it. It's under MIT license. So we have a really simple interface. We keep it as simple as possible so that we show that people don't really mess, but if you do manage to find ways of not putting the right data in the right place, we really value feedback. So please tell us if anything is not clear. Really briefly, we process stuff on the fly. We don't store anything. The inputs are any geometry file in GeoJSON format or using GeoIDs. And the results that you get is a table, like a simple tabular table that contains geospatial zonal statistics for a wide variety of geospatial layers. And we combine those layers through a very straightforward, transparent decision tree to assess risk of deforestation. So we have an API, there's documentation that can explicit the calls that you can make to the API, and it's currently being used in quite a large amount of traceability solutions, also directly by operators and traders. So you have a list here in terms of traceability. It's integrated inside InnoTrace, inside Carto, who are the people that initially set up Global Forest Watch. TechnoServe is now using WISP inside their field app. We're collaborating with FarmForce in different geographies. We're also integrating WISP inside the Deforestation Free Trade Gateway that is being constructed by ITC and that will be launched in September. And we collaborate with smaller service providers, but that are very, very competent and providing interesting solutions like Sustain. We also have direct interest and process being made by operators who have their own solutions. So I think I'll stop there, and unless I'm really too short on time, but I think I've spoken already quite a bit. Just like to mention that we have a website where you can find info and resources around the WISP solution. Again, this is being built under the SAFE umbrella, together with partners, really advocating for interoperability, and we're really happy to have had the chance through DIASCA to engage with so many different technical partners to be able to construct that solution. I think I will hand over the floor now to Elke to speak a little bit more about the Team Europe Initiative Hub, in particular the SAFE program.
Thanks a lot, Jamie. Thanks a lot. I appreciate it. Yeah.
Over to you.
So thanks a lot. I really appreciate. I like the lot of WISP platform. There's a lot of open source thinking. You brought in a lot of good players from both the sides, the solution providers, and also the people who will be the consumers of that, and onto one platform. Very rich products being developed, data being produced and being analyzed, and then being used all the time. I think there's very interesting dynamics going on there, and I think at some stage we will bring in all the World Bank investments in this area, or all investment managers, to talk to you guys about how we can integrate a lot of these initiatives into our investments. So thanks a lot for sharing that. And I think without further ado, I'll now bring in the next speaker, and Alke Samik Mathe. She has extensive experience. She leads the Sustainable Agriculture Forest Ecosystems project under the Team Europe Initiative on Deforestation-Free Value Chains. But her expertise is when I met her last, when she was working for the D4Ag portfolio of Global Agriculture Innovation Fund, and she was supporting development of a technical foresight tool, and she has been a collaborator off and on with us in the past. So over to you, LK.
Thank you so much, and it's great to be back. I hope you can hear and see my screen.
Yes, we can.
And it's always very difficult to start a presentation after having seen and heard about really great, very hands-on solutions. And in my presentation now, I will not focus on any technical solutions or digital solutions, but more on the collaborative environment with DIASCA and some of the tools which you have heard in the previous presentations. And specifically here, I would like to introduce to you, if you haven't heard yet, of the new Team Europe initiative on deforestation-free value chains, which is a collaborative initiative set up by various member states of the European Union, launched last year at the COP, specifically by some key European member states like Germany, the Netherlands, France, with support of other EU member states, really in an effort to ramp up support and engagement around sustainable, especially deforestation-free value chains, and specifically also around the new EU deforestation regulation, which some of the speakers before me have addressed, and I know you've also had a webinar on this in previous sessions. And yeah, the Team Europe initiative really is an initiative to work together with a wide variety of stakeholders to scale solutions, to collaborate more closely. And I think this fits very well with the topic of today, because if we want to scale and digital public infrastructure, we need to work together with a lot of projects. We need to join efforts, work hand in hand, which is also a bit of the logo of Team Europe initiatives in general, which focus on working to better together. And I think DIASCA has proven this, and this is also the spirit of the Team Europe initiative, TEI in short. And specifically here, you can see some of the key flagship projects which are part of this Team Europe initiative on deforestation-free value chains. There are many very interesting projects working in several countries across the globe on several, especially EUDR relevant commodities. And one of the flagships which I would like to talk a little bit more about today, and where we're also collaborating very closely with DIASCA, is the Sustainable Agriculture for Forest Ecosystems project, which is currently implementing in 6 countries already. We're scaling to 4 more countries, so we'll be in 10 countries. And I saw in the chat earlier, there was a question about more support for African countries. And I'm very happy that we will be implementing very soon in Uganda, in Burundi, in Cameroon, and we've already set up activities in DRC all around coffee and cocoa. So I think there is a lot of support or starting up together with other flagship projects, other projects of people in the room who are also going to work on this. And SAFE, as a side note, is funded by the EU, by Germany and the Netherlands. And here is just an overview again of the countries we're working in. And very important for us in SAFE is that our focus really is on smallholder farmers within deforestation-free supply chains, to see how we can harness the potentials and opportunities of regulations like the EUDR, and I think there are global regulations coming up in this field as well, but also ensuring that they really benefit and stay in. So really ensuring inclusive deforestation-free value chains, of which DPI is a very, very important element, which I'll go into a bit later. So here you just see how we're set up, and I know this is a lot of information. I don't want to go into all of this, but I think it's important to mention that in addition to the country activities, we are really working on, for example, as was seen earlier in Indonesia, with WISP and the work together with the Forest Data Partnership and DIASCA. We're also working at regional level. So how can we bring in regional experiences and solutions at country level into regional dialogues that, for example, Brazil, Uruguay, Paraguay around beef value chains can learn about solutions that are ongoing, or Indonesia and Malaysia and other neighboring countries can, and the same goes, for example, for coffee in Eastern or Central Africa. So that's very important that we can bring these experiences, including experiences on traceability and everything that all the different building blocks are needed for a digital public infrastructure, that we can make this available through outreach, through information, through knowledge exchange. And there we also have this hat of the Team Europe initiative, where SAFE leads the so-called hub, so responsible for the coordination, outreach, knowledge management from all the different flagships and for all the different partners, from the Forest Data Partnership to DIASCA. And thanks to DIASCA, we've started a few activities on digital public infrastructure. Indonesia was mentioned earlier. Remy already presented WISP. And we are excited to say that we will also really want to scale and work more on DPI, but also bring this hand in hand with aspects of gender equity and social inclusion, which is very important to us, aspects of access to finance. So to really have this holistic view of everything that's needed within this kind of ecosystem that is needed for a deforestation-free value chains. And here, what is needed? So under the Team Europe Initiative Hub, we had a very nice 2-day event in Brussels in May with a wide variety of partners, also some partners from Latin America and specifically some government representatives also from Indonesia and Ecuador, and looked at what does all of this mean for smallholder inclusion. Because with all the different regulations, and our focus, of course, is the EUDR, we really need to make sure that DPI, but all the different data streams that go along with it, are inclusive. Because trading the commodities, and I saw somebody in the comments already mentioned trade, it's very much also about trade. And so you're not only trading with commodities, you are trading with data, and how can we make sure that it's inclusive at smallholder level. And I don't expect you to read these 2 slides, but we focused a lot on the various aspects that are needed and the opportunities, and how can we bring this into our projects. And I think this was just a kickoff, and together with DIASCA, we definitely want to continue this work and bring this into the Team Europe initiative and continue building this, as I mentioned, together with a lot of partners, and working more on digital public infrastructure aspect. And last but not least, while we are sharing websites, I would also like to just show you the website of the Team Europe initiative. It's called the Zero Deforestation Hub. We've just set up the website. We're still tweaking here and there. It's a website that will be growing and hopefully blossoming. And you can access the link at the bottom. If you have any information that you would like to share, because we have a knowledge space, we're setting up a library around all the different information on deforestation-free value chains and the UDR, feel free to share it with us. You can see the email address also at the bottom of the slide. We'd love to receive your information. If you have any ideas on collaboration, events, topics that are important, please feel free to reach out as well. And as I mentioned, I think we will definitely continue our collaboration with DIASCA and WISP. And as a last note on WISP, I had the pleasure of getting a little demo on the interoperability between the INA trace, which Andrea presented in the beginning, and WISP, which Remy just presented. And it already, it is very exciting. And I think there is so much more. And that's one of the potentials I think we can harness here in the sector. So with that, I will end my presentation and hand over to the next speaker, Andres Ferreira. Thank you so much.
Thanks a lot, LK. That's a lot of very interesting things happening, and I think they deserve another webinar on this deforestation-free value chains. It's an area which is of great concern to our environment, natural resource, forestry, and other teams in the bank. The bank we have reorganized from 1st July. We have now called the Planet Vice Presidency. The name is called Planet Vice Presidency. And so I think the Planet Vice Presidency includes forestry, water, environment, natural resource, blue economy, and agriculture all together. And so I think this presentation, there are a lot of people from those teams also attending today. And we feel that this is a much more futuristic topic. I think it's desirable to go for deforestation-free value chains. And these are some practical ways by which we can reach there. The alliances and platforms, very important here. I think this can't be done unless we take a platform and ecosystem solution there. Thanks a lot, LK. Appreciate you sharing all the rich work and insights. I'm very glad that also people are also raising a lot of questions on the chat. So I would request the panelists to go to the chat and keep on carrying out the rich discussion we are going on, and please put your questions, because after Andres, we will go for a Q&A session and we'll pick the key questions and go back to panel again. So without further ado, I think we have a very industrious discussant. Andres has he's an industry data standards and collaborations lead at Syngenta. And he also played the role of data asset manager for Syngenta's digital observation and measurement platform. And he has led many initiatives in the past on Egg Gateway and worked with a lot of such teams. He's also now convened the International Standard Organization. So he has many incarnations, and I can't describe all of them. Andres, over to you, and please, the floor is yours.
Thank you. Can you hear me okay?
Yes, we can hear you.
All right, thanks. So just to provide a little bit more context, I don't participate directly in the DIASCA project. Consider me an ally and an admirer. The direction from which I'm approaching this is from efforts to standardize data exchanges to make them scalable, right? Going back to the very beginning, to the things that Andrea was saying. I've been working over the last few years increasingly in the context of the International Organization for Standardization, ISO. Back in 2021, they chartered a strategic advisory group for smart farming that I co-led with Johannes Lehmann of DIN, with the mission to understand to what extent ISO's corpus of over 25,000 published standards is supporting the sustainable development goals, or if not, what gaps exist there, and to propose a prioritized strategic roadmap to solve those gaps. Then I, after that, became the chair of one of the recommended gap-filling solutions, which is an ISO technical committee on data-driven agri-food systems. And what we do there is look for ways to resolve interoperability problems. Now, let's just go back to the basics there with this picture. When you're trying to solve a problem, like say the EUDR related data exchanges, and you have some entity that is consuming data. Typically, the data come from a variety of producers. And those producers, be they machinery or different farm management information systems or things like that, typically all have their own proprietary data formats as a result of the way that the industry has grown. So imagine these sequences of letters just representing the different formats. And then to get these formats into a form that the consumer can actually do something with, you have to make these different translations. And the way things are usually set up, the things happening in this within these dotted lines, these translations all fall on the shoulders of the data consumer, which is quite overwhelming. In fact, having been in that space for a very long time, I can tell you it's really not scalable. It's very, very difficult. The alternative to this, of course, is to use standards where both the data producers and the data consumers agree on using a standard format and standard controlled vocabularies, and thus the burden of creating data-driven tools is much easier, because the burden of translating the data or just the burden of interoperability in general is spread more evenly. Because you're using the same data format and semantics. So what's this got to do with DIASCA, and how does it fit into this model? Well, the DIASCA team is emphasizing the use of standards to develop the scalable infrastructure for data interoperability. Their traceability group has looked at dozens of ISO and other organization standards as pillars upon which to build their work. That behavior is what I call part of the solution behavior, as opposed to part of the problem behavior of just making more interoperability problems, as is their openness to partnerships. And the projects that they're supporting are relevant, timely, and very visible, right? So the data exchanges that for example, are needed to enable compliance with the EUDR. So the leadership of my ISO technical committee on data-driven agri-food systems sees DIASCA as a great partner for bringing scale to important aspects of decision-making within data-driven agri-food systems, such as traceability, assessing deforestation, and so forth. So from that point of view of an industry person that has spent maybe 25 years solving different kinds of interoperability problems and data exchange problems, I see what's happening here with a lot of enthusiasm. So thank you for including me in your effort and giving me visibility into what's going on in DIASCA. I'm really pleased and encouraged. All right, back to you.
Thanks a lot, Andres, for sharing your ideas, perceptions, and some things which I think will illustrate what direction this whole program is going to take in future. So I think there has been very interesting set of questions flowing in this period. So I can't do justice to all of them, but obviously you have been responding to a lot of questions in the chat. I will pick some questions and some which are very relevant to the World Bank as we go forward. And I would like the panelists to decide who wants to respond on them as we go forward. And, the issue which I think we are grappling in the World Bank is how do we take this to scale as the regulations keep on coming in. Countries are asking us that what should we be investing in to be ready for this transition. So if you are making recommendations to governments to invest in similar digital public infrastructure, what is the main recommendation you will give it to them on how they can create more enablers for the digital infrastructure to happen? So this is a question from my side, but I will then take issues from the audience also and include them as we go along. So can someone respond to two questions? One, what should be the government investing in and how on the digital public infrastructure for supply chains? And second, how can we take what you are doing already to scale? Two questions. So John, would you like to go first? And probably I see a hand from Remy. Remy goes next. Please go ahead, John.
Yeah, thank you, Pramesh. A very interesting question. And I worked with your teams in Vietnam and Laos for digital transformation of agri-food. And the recommendations to governments there were to look at the bigger picture, obviously appreciating that they're coming from a position where technology is no longer an issue. So even when you have developed countries, they have access to the leading technology. And in fact, in Vietnam itself, they have some systems integrators that are world-class. So we have to take the technology off the table, but we suggested to governments in these developing countries that they need to look at the enabling regulatory framework. In other words, do they have regulations or do they need to modify their regulations to enable the digital transformation of agri-food? And I think that's number one, that's absolutely crucial. The second one is, I mentioned as an anecdote in my last slide, open science. And this is part of the issue when we're putting in digital traceability solutions and we're trying to get to scale. We have to remember that digital solutions will not guarantee that the food is safe. A digital solution will not guarantee that the food is authentic. A digital solution will not guarantee that the food or the commodity is not part of an illicit trade network. So we need to have open science, and that's the issue, the area where I see we have the biggest issue with scale is how do we get the technology in the laboratories out into the field are more scalable. The technology I'm less concerned about. So just to summarize, enabling regulations at the government level to enable the digital transformation. And secondly, the open science scalability, I would say we need to focus a lot on. Thank you.
Thanks a lot, John. Much appreciated. Remy, over to you.
Yeah, I'd just like to complement with a specific, precise example of what I dealt with on what kind of data sets can be used and can be made available and can be produced at national level to help support compliance. I would just like to give the example of Ivory Coast, who under the Sustainable Cocoa Initiative produced a land cover map for 2020 and released it publicly. And the fact that they make that map available and that source of geospatial data available is actually enabling a lot of smallholders who don't necessarily understand or have the skills to create this data to actually put it into their claims. And I think this is a really good example of how government have a responsibility of producing this information and sharing it widely. And for the terms of what is needed for scaling up, it is indeed a complicated question and topic, and probably at the heart of all the questions, in particular for the geolocation, more than due diligence. If I think about the regulation, I was also in Kenya last week in support of the coffee sector to try to provide solutions for scaling up how geolocation can be done. And again, I think here governments have a responsibility and a position to act to actually standardize and help these geolocation efforts to be combined and to be made available to all. So I don't have all the recipe for how to scale up, but I'm sure governments do have a responsibility, and I think standards there are really the key to move it forward.
So anyone else from the panelists would like to come on this? Yeah, go ahead, Andrea, and then probably LK as well. Yeah.
I would just like to add the responsibility of the private sector to your talking about the responsibility of government, Remy, because there we know, and Elko already mentioned gender aspects and the difficulties for female smallholders are very much in our view on that. So we really need trainings, we need knowledge there, and this is something where really the private sector has to take over responsibility as well.
Thanks a lot. LK, you want to come in on this point?
Actually, also just wanted to say the responsibility of the private sector, and I saw somebody asked about public-private partnerships, and I think that's something we need to emphasize a lot more, because at the end of the day, it needs to be clear that, for example, like regulations like the EU deforestation regulation, it's the companies that need to prove compliance. It's not the government or the public sector. So we need to work very closely hand in hand with the private sector. And I think there it's also a matter of who invests in, for example, if we talk about digital public infrastructure, it cannot just be development corporation or civil society who invests in this. So we need to look at who invests, how do we work, how do we promote collaborative efforts between the private sector and public entities, which I know is something I had a long discussion about 2 weeks ago with a lot of people from the coffee sector. What collaborative models are there where we can also work together more transparently in a pre-competitive nature when it comes to, for example, DPI? Yeah, so I think that's something which I think we really need to work on when it comes to scaling this, because it's not something that either stakeholder party can do in their own. And that's why I think we need more collaborative efforts. I think DIASCA, for example, comes to DPI, does great work. There are many other initiatives focusing on other things. The Team Europe initiative is one, but we need to bring this together, because otherwise we're going to have an extremely fragmented environment, and we just don't have enough funds for the for everything that can and should be done. So we need to concert our efforts a little bit better and make sure that the funds we have are invested and pooled more consistently.
So is there, Remy, you want to have something follow up on this, or your hand is old hand? Yeah. Okay, fine. So I think it's a good point, and I think that what people are asking questions, there are many questions coming up. So basically, what I would like to say is that in case of productivity, soil health, we have been able to create these platforms by creating farmer digital registries, geotagging of plots, and creating foundational data through the public investment, where the private sector can come in and then start building products and services around that. So there is a need for a foundational investment, which is then it's like plug and play, where people can come and do on this platform, and that's what I see in DIASCA there. So I would say that we have 36 projects working on commodities like coffee, cocoa, all over Africa, Ghana, Cote d'Ivoire, everywhere. Now, clearly, if we were, governments are asking us two things. What should be the public investment to enable private investment to happen? What should be the public investment to ensure a lot of producers participate in global supply chains? They're asking us a question about what should we be investing in, which platforms we should be investing in. So what we are also doing now on soil health and soil carbon, we are creating AI engines now, artificial intelligence engines, which, as you say, Alka, there's so much scattering going on. We don't converge that, and artificial intelligence now allows us to create content which comes from various sources, integrates it into large language models and all. So what do you see as the role of artificial intelligence in integrating all the things which we are talking about into a platform which is then offered to all the stakeholders there? Are you doing something like that in this field, or are you planning to do that? Anyone can take that question. Yeah, go ahead, John.
Thank you. As I mentioned earlier, technology, I don't see technology anymore as a major inhibitor. Infrastructure is in a lot of countries, developing countries, an issue, but the access to the technology is widespread. So, but I think we need to change the mindset of some of the governments, and we need to establish that we have been successful with major interoperability projects in the past. We only have to look at what we've done with global phone systems, what we've done with global airports and our baggage tags, and what we've done with ATMs. And you know, I met the guy who invented the magnetic strip for credit cards and bank cards, and he got a task from President Obama to actually, can you do the same? His question was, can you do the same for agri-food? And this was a number of years ago, of course, and it was very difficult because industry did not always want to move forward and governments felt a little bit disjointed. The export, the development, the production and local consumption, and then the exports of food is a critical need for every country. Social harmony is maintained by access to stable products like rice and other commodities, depending on the country. So there needs to be more collaboration between governments and industry to look at how to move all of this forward, how to apply technology judiciously. But as I mentioned earlier, there needs to be an enabling regulatory framework to move forward. We're finding that governments now, they're a little bit shy in telling us that they're using AI, but governments are experimenting with AI right across the food sector, and I think it'll only start to increase. So we have been successful, big, hairy, scary projects. We can do it again with agri-food. And I'll finish on this point. The food industry currently has no experience in the level of traceability that's required for EUDR. And let me explain that briefly. If you're importing beef into the EU, you don't only have to prove that the beef, the cow, the cattle were from a deforested, that they were not from a deforested area, but also their animal feed. And their animal feed includes two other commodities that are controlled under EUDR, soy and palm oil. So you extend actually to the feed that the animal had as well. That level of complexity can be done in pharmaceuticals, but currently the food industry struggles with that. And I think we need to learn from the other sectors that are able to do that. And maybe some of my colleagues would have further info on that. Andrea, most likely as well.
Thanks, John. And let's go to Andrea. Yeah, Andres.
Yes, thank you. I wanted to go back to the question of what role AI can have in these sorts of things, right? There is a sort of temptation to think that with these powerful tools that can link data in different ways, in some way we can sort of lower our guard and not have to pay so much attention to trying to clean up data and set up better identification schemes and so forth, in a sort of wishful thinking that, well, the AI will take care of that. And unfortunately, I don't think that's the case, because it's once Humpty Dumpty once Humpty Dumpty had his great fall, it's very hard to put him back together again, right? If you're trying to make sense of data that's coming from equipment out in the field, and that equipment hasn't been calibrated, for example, you have a lot of uncertainty. Your AI isn't going to be able to figure that out. When you're trying to use data that's come from weather stations and so forth, if you don't properly identify the different data fields, your AI agent can make wrong assumptions about what the different columns mean, and so forth. So I think that efforts to date in trying to make data findable, accessible, interoperable, and reusable through a better metadata management for example, are as important and current now as ever, if not even more than before, now that we have the possibility of creating AI tools that do important things with that. And unfortunately, the idea of data quality hasn't been very much on people's minds in agricultural and food systems to date. I hope that'll change.
Thanks a lot. I think you've sounded really that, see, AI will only work when you have good data and good content. Without that, it will turn out a lot of trash. So, but the generative AI is allowing you to take a lot of scattered sources and create better rigor and validation. But as you rightly said, the foundational investments are very critical in this sector, and which will then lead to that. So I think this is something we are looking at in terms of what is the global public good and what is the national public good on this. And I think it will not be created through one agency investing in it, as we have, all of you have talked about. So it will be good to, I think at some stage we would like the 10 or 12 governments which want to move in this direction to enter into a dialogue with some of you and some other people, so that we arrive at some kind of consensus on what we should be investing in more systematically from the World Bank's perspective in the next 5 to 10 years. So I think, but these all points are very valid. So I want to just raise some points which people are raising about, also about how can you build systems which are, from production to shelf. Have you seen examples of things which are where you have built the systems where farmers, private sector, and traceability is being done across the system there? Is there any example of scale which we have been able to achieve through these collaborations there? Can you illustrate? You already talked about some examples, but what is the best example we need to learn from, or series of examples we need to learn from, which can help all our stakeholders to learn systematically on how they should invest in and what they should invest in? Is there any example you would like to illustrate in that area? Yeah. Go ahead, Andre.
Well, I can't talk about traceability examples in general. I can only, of course, talk about InnoTrace and how that worked. And what we noticed there, that for 2 or 3 years, we really had to fight for working on it and for the budget to go on working on it. And what we see now is really that it's growing and spreading, and we do not even have to talk about it anymore. It's just like people talk about it and tell about it. So this is why we have a huge project now in Central America working with InnoTrace, also on DPIs and using the code. This is why in Rwanda we have the possibility of an IT firm working with InnoTrace as well, using the code, further developing the code. So, and there loads of questions that my small team can't even answer as we would love to, but it needed its time to spread the word. And now scaling up is possible. And now also, this is one very important point in the combination with WISP. And yeah, now it's really EUDR ready, as we used to say. That needed its time, but now we are there, and so of course now we can scale that. And John, I see your hand. I just wanted to add one thing about this blockchain and data quality aspect, because what we see all the time, and it's really years now that we are working on that topic, InnoTrace is blockchain ready. We coded it that way. It could be a blockchain, because when we started with this, the blockchain hype was just like on fire. And that was kind of understood that we would develop it as something, as a blockchain, but it is not one, because nobody is interested in really ruling it like that. And we won't, it's not the solution for the data quality question. Therefore, we really need to add different information, as with, for example, with the different layers is doing it. about what kind of data is going in to avoid garbage in, garbage out, and have quality of data that goes into a into a traceability system, and then be it blockchain or not.
Thank you. John, would you like to comment on this point?
Yeah, I want to reflect on industry and government learnings. In the US, about a dozen years ago, there was an initiative called the PTI initiative, the Produce Traceability Initiative, where the marketing associations in both Canada and the US, plus the standards organizations and industry, everybody agreed to implement traceability for produce, fresh produce. And we know the recurring issues that the US has with recalls and illnesses with the likes of romaine lettuce, for example. But after about 10 years, the industry decided to assess the success of that program. And after 10 years, which was about 3 years ago, they assessed that only 60% of the participants who had agreed to implement traceability actually implemented it, only about 60%. And then when you mined into that, why didn't you implement the traceability? Two things. The first one was the cost, and the second one was the complexity. And within the food industry today, there still is a lot of, use my system if you're the big player. You have a power asymmetry over your suppliers. So there were the two issues. The FDA came out with a competition for low to no cost traceability solutions just over a year ago. So I just want to leave that out there, that the cost and complexity we need to be able to deal with. The second is there's a notion that, and I don't like using this term, farm to fork traceability is easy. And there's even governments that talk about that. But when you talk about farm to fork traceability, what you're actually signaling consumer surveillance. That's not what people intend to signal, but that is what's signaled. There are companies that can do that full traceability. Companies like Costco, who have a loyalty base, and they're compliant with privacy laws. They can actually trace back to where the products came from, and they can track forward to who bought those products. Most organizations cannot do that unless they have a loyalty program or if the consumer bought the product online. So there's a lot of risks inherent in that. And even when a company says, well, I have a QR code on the product, I can give you full traceability. When a consumer scans that product, it's only a trace back. And that trace back is not to all of the actors that was in the supply chain. But again, so we're reliant on these big companies that do have loyalty programs to be able to share the best practices on how they've done it. But we need to be very cautious with any claims about farm to fork traceability because of its negative signaling and because of the complexity. And inherent in all of the complexity in supply chains today is the lack of interoperability between the trading partners. That is the single biggest issue.
Thanks a lot. I think this is very, very, very. So I just want to ask a follow-up question. And what if we, as an institution which works with 45 countries on agribusiness projects which are intending to invest in similar investments, how will you work on interoperability? What's the convening? Who is going to do the convening to ensure that interoperability becomes of a higher order than what it is? There's no optimization there, but there has to be a higher level of interoperability there. So what are the ways we should go about this topic?
That's a complex one to address, but I would say that you start off from the basis of industry standards. And as Andres was talking about, and my colleagues here, there are existing industry standards for interoperability in agri-food. And as Andres pointed out, the evolving one within ISO. But there is an ISO standard and a GS1 standard for data interoperability in supply chains. We have to leverage what is there today and what's been applied, and then move forward on that. I think myself, to be honest, and solution providers may not like me making this comment, but the solution providers they must understand that it can't only be their company. Those solution providers need to go out with statements like, we can interoperate with multiple other platforms. that's what's holding us back today, I think. And I would love to see the solution providers making those expressions that we can interoperate with other solution providers.
Thanks a lot. I think it's very good. There's a good dialogue going on between the various players, the solution providers and others. The questions are very rich, and thanks a lot for all the panelists for responding to them. We'll keep this chat open for some time. And if you can respond to some of the questions which people are raising, I think there are clearly questions about, are we going to work in Africa more? And what are the special efforts being happening in Africa? Because all our investments are currently in Africa, quite a bit. 35% of our investments are in Africa on the value chain side. So I think there's already work going on, as Remy said, about FAO and the World Bank working together in certain countries. And there's a lot of effort going on there. But I think clearly we need to build a platform which brings all these stakeholders together on a regular basis. And we come and then agree on something. The data quality, as Andres said, very critical. The physical infrastructure to accompany the digital infrastructure, very critical. And then, so in the sense that I think the example which I've seen very interesting is when China faced a lot of food safety issues. That's the time they started developing a digital platform to enable a lot of SMEs to participate in. They came from the food safety perspective, and then I think they invested in a number of systems for SMEs to access a digital solution, very costly as percentage of costs. So they came out with a lot of common products which people could access. They built a lot of capacity over a period of time. So I consider the China Food Safety Improvement Project as a very good illustration of what public and private can do in our portfolio. So I think we would like to do this for coffee projects, the cocoa projects, and all the commodity value chain projects as we go forward. And there are a lot of pointers to what you. Andres, you want to come in? Because I want to close this in time.
I wanted
people now. Yeah.
I wanted to just take a minute to build a little on what John said, right? So yes, indeed, there are several existing standards that are very helpful, and now we have a home for new ones that can build on agri-food specific needs. But sometimes these standards are very well kept secrets, and technologists out in the different regions where you would most want people to be implementing these standards don't really know about their existence, because the people that write the standards aren't necessarily very good communicators or very good at stakeholder engagement, right? So when you're thinking about, you asked, where can you put resources into promoting interoperability, spreading the word about what these standards are, how they help, and bringing people to the table so that they can identify unmet needs to solve with new standards that can interoperate with existing ones, I think would be a great use of attention and resources. Thank you.
Thanks a lot. And just very practical advice. And I think this is not the only dialogue we're going to have on this. I think we'll follow up with you very quickly, because I think the requests for advice on and investments on this topic are increasing. And I don't think we have all the expertise in the bank on this. So we will draw on a lot of people who are here on this panel to really build an architecture of advisory and technical assistance to governments and other stakeholders at the country level. Our team in IFC, which is our private sector arm, is also really working. This is an issue which a lot of people from our private sector arm are on the webinar today. A lot of our investment managers on the webinar. And I hope that all the stakeholders from bank and outside would learn from this very enriching dialogue. And I'm very appreciative of DIASCA and other people who have participated in this panel today. I think it gives us a lot of pointers on how we should think about investing in both the knowledge, learning, and investments in this area. So I also thank all the participants. A very rich set of questions. You can see they were very animated and exchanged. And I wish I could have picked some of them to talk to you also on that, but because of the lack of time in this format and having too many presenters, we're not able to do that. But you will get a recording and you will get the gist of all the discussions. We not only circulate the proceedings, but we also circulate the chat. So because the chat is as important as the webinar itself. So look forward to the next one. Please watch this space. And so I think we have Japanese coming up, 3 starters from Japan who are going to talk about what they're doing in this field in the next webinar. So please watch this space. But I would like to thank all of you, Andrea, John, LK, Remy, and Andres for really giving us a very good illustration of what is being done, what could be done, and what are the issues going forward. Thank you very much. Have a good morning, good afternoon, good evening everywhere. John, thanks for getting up early for us. Thank you.
Thank you. Have a great day.
Thank you
Bye.
very much.
Thank you very much.